2 years can change everything. The boy stood in front of the mirror, hardly recognizing himself. Gone was the skinny kid from the streets. In his place stood a healthy teenager in a crisp school uniform, navy blue blazer with a school crest, gray pants, polished shoes. His hair was neatly cut, his eyes clear and focused. "Ready for the big day?" asked the woman at the doorway. She was in her 50s with kind eyes and a warm smile that reminded him a little of his grandma. The boy nodded, straightening his tie one last time. "I think so, Miss H." Miss H had been his guardian since the rich man had arranged everything. She wasn't trying to replace his grandma. No one could do that. But she'd given him something he'd lost: stability. A home. Someone who cared if he came home on time, ate his vegetables, and did his homework. "He'll be here any minute," Miss H said, checking her watch. "Better grab your speech." The boy picked up the folded paper from his desk. He'd worked on it for weeks, wanting to get the words just right. Today was important, not just for him, but for all the kids like him. The doorbell rang. Miss H smiled. "That'll be him. 2 years, and he's never once been late." The boy took a deep breath and walked downstairs. When he opened the front door, the rich man was standing there, though the boy no longer thought of him that way. Over the past 2 years, he'd become something else: a mentor, a friend. "Look at you," the rich man said, smiling widely. "Ready to change the world today?" The boy smiled back. "One step at a time, like you taught me." They drove through the city in a sleek black car, passing the very streets where the boy had once searched for food and safe places to sleep. The city looked different now, not because it had changed, but because he had. "Nervous about your speech?" the rich man asked as they turned onto Lakeshore Drive. "A little," the boy admitted. "There'll be a lot of important people there." "Including you," the rich man reminded him. "Never forget that." They pulled up to a gleaming new building with a sign that read, "Don't eat that foundation." The boy still smiled every time he saw the name. Inside, a crowd had gathered for the grand opening. Business leaders, city officials, reporters, and, most importantly to the boy, dozens of kids from the streets and troubled homes, all wearing the same uniforms he wore. The past 2 years had been a whirlwind. After that night in the hotel, the rich man had been true to his word. The boy had been enrolled in a top private school with a full scholarship. He'd moved in with Miss H, a retired teacher who worked with the foundation to provide homes for kids with nowhere else to go. But the rich man hadn't stopped there. That chance meeting on the street had changed him too. He'd created an entire foundation dedicated to finding kids like the boy. Smart, capable children who just needed a chance. Kids who had fallen through the cracks of the system. Don't eat. That wasn't just a foundation. It was now a school, a dormitory, a medical clinic, and a food safety education program all in one. And today was the official opening. The rich man took the stage first, adjusting the microphone. 2 years ago, he began. "I was about to eat a sandwich from a street vendor when a young boy shouted, 'Don't eat that.' That warning saved me from getting very sick, but it did something much more important too. It reminded me that character isn't about how much money you have or where you live. It's about doing the right thing, even when there's nothing in it for you." The crowd listened intently as the rich man continued. That boy had nothing. He was living on the streets after losing his grandmother. He was hungry and alone. But he still took the time to warn a stranger about bad food. That moment changed my life. The rich man gestured toward the boy sitting in the front row. "I'd like to introduce you to that young man now. He's going to tell you his story himself." Heart pounding, the boy walked up to the stage. From the podium, he could see the whole room: reporters with cameras, business people in fancy suits, and kids just like he had been, wearing their new school uniforms and looking up at him with hope in their eyes. He unfolded his speech, took a deep breath, and began. "My grandma always told me that doing the right thing isn't something you get paid for. You just do it because it's right." He looked up from his paper. 2 years ago, I was homeless, sleeping behind a restaurant and digging through trash for food. Today I'm standing here with straight A's, a safe place to live, and a future I can actually see. He paused, looking at the faces watching him. People think homeless kids are invisible, but we're not. We see everything. We notice when food vendors drop meat on dirty ground. We notice which alleys are safe to sleep in. We notice which adults will help and which ones will hurt. We're not invisible. We're just unseen. A hush fell over the room as he continued. This foundation isn't just about giving us food or a place to stay. It's about seeing us, really seeing us, and letting us know that we matter too. He looked directly at the rich man now. 2 years ago, a man who could have bought anything he wanted gave me something money can't buy. He gave me a chance. Not because I was special, but because he took the time to really see me. The boy gestured to the other kids in uniform. Now we have 37 students here, all with stories like mine. And by next year we'll have 100. Kids who just need someone to see them. Because once you're really seen, you can't become invisible again. Tears glistened in more than a few eyes as the boy finished speaking. The audience rose to their feet, applauding. Reporters snapped photos. The rich man stepped forward and put his arm around the boy's shoulders. Later, as they cut the ribbon on the new building, a reporter asked the rich man how much the foundation had cost him. Millions, the rich man replied without hesitation, and it was the best investment I've ever made. The boy stood nearby, listening. What about you? The reporter asked, turning to him. How has this changed your life? The boy thought for a moment. I used to think I was nothing, he said finally. Just a kid no one wanted. Now I know better. My grandma was right all along. Doing the right thing matters. Sometimes it changes everything. That evening, after all the excitement had died down, the boy and the rich man sat on a bench outside the new building. You did good today, kid, the rich man said. We both did, the boy replied. The rich man nodded. Your grandma would be proud. The boy looked up at the sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. I think she knows, he said softly. I think she's been watching all along. For a moment they sat in comfortable silence, two people from different worlds who'd found something rare between them. Respect, understanding, and a shared belief that doing the right thing, even in something as simple as a warning about food, could change everything. So, the rich man said finally, still want to be a doctor? The boy smiled, thinking about how far he'd come and how far he still could go. Yes, he said. But not just any doctor. I want to work with kids like me, the ones everyone else forgets, to see. The rich man nodded, pride evident in his eyes. Then that's exactly what you'll do. And in that moment, on that bench, the boy knew it was true. From homeless to hopeful, from invisible to seen, all because he'd shouted, "Don't eat that!" Eleanor sat on the hard plastic chair in the processing area, her back straight despite her exhaustion. The handcuffs had finally been removed, leaving angry red marks on her wrists. She rubbed them gently, wincing at the pain that shot through her arthritic joints. The clock on the wall showed almost an hour had passed since her arrest. Her book club friends would be wondering where she was by now, the discussion of this month's mystery novel happening without her. Several officers passed by, some giving her curious looks. Eleanor knew what they saw, an older black woman in a navy dress and pearls, sitting quietly in a place she clearly didn't belong. Officer Hayes had disappeared after processing her, leaving her under the watchful eye of a young desk officer who seemed uncomfortable with the situation. Can I get you some water, ma'am? The young officer asked, breaking the silence. Eleanor nodded. That would be kind, thank you. When he returned with a paper cup of water, Eleanor took it with as much dignity as she could muster. My son will be here soon, she said calmly. There's been a terrible mistake. The young officer shifted his weight from one foot to another. Yes, ma'am. Officer Hayes is checking on the shoplifting report details now. Eleanor sipped the water slowly. In her 40 years of living in Pine Creek, she had never so much as gotten a parking ticket. Now here she was, arrested and humiliated, all because she drove a blue sedan. Outside the station, a black SUV with county sheriff markings pulled into the reserved parking spot near the entrance. The driver's door opened, and Sheriff Anthony Wilson stepped out, his face set in hard lines. At 6'3", he commanded attention even without the uniform. Today, he wore not just his uniform, but also an expression that made two smoking officers quickly put out their cigarettes and head back inside. Anthony checked his watch. He had been in a county budget meeting when his mother called. He'd left immediately, calling his deputy to cover for him. In 15 years of law enforcement, including 3 as county sheriff, he had never received a call like that from his mother. The thought of her sitting in this station, detained like a criminal, made his hands clench into fists. But he took a deep breath, unclenched them, and walked inside with measured steps. He was sheriff first right now, son second. The front desk officer straightened immediately when Anthony walked in. "Sheriff Wilson, we weren't expecting you today, sir." Anthony didn't bother with pleasantries. "Where is she?" The officer looked confused. "Sir, my mother, Eleanor Wilson." "Where is she being held?" The color drained from the officer's face. "Your mother, sir?" Anthony's jaw tightened. "That's what I said." The words seemed to hang in the air as everyone within earshot froze. A female officer at a nearby desk audibly gasped. The front desk officer fumbled with his computer mouse, suddenly desperate to look busy. "Processing area, sir," someone finally said from behind a partition. Anthony nodded and walked past the desk, his footsteps echoing in the now silent room. Every officer he passed seemed to shrink back slightly. He had a reputation for fairness, but also for demanding accountability. And now, it seemed, someone in his jurisdiction had arrested his mother. Officer Hayes was coming out of a side office looking at some paperwork when he nearly collided with the sheriff. "Sorry, sir, I didn't see." His words died as he recognized his boss. Anthony gave him a look that could have frozen water. "Are you Officer Hayes?" "Yes, sir." Hayes stood straighter, confusion clear on his face. "We'll talk shortly," Anthony said, his voice low and controlled as he continued toward the processing area. When Anthony turned the corner and saw his mother sitting there, something inside him broke a little. Eleanor Wilson had raised him alone, after his father died when Anthony was just 12. She had worked 2 jobs to put him through college, had never missed a school event or a birthday. She was the most law-abiding, community-minded person he knew. Now she sat in his police station, rubbing her wrists, looking older than he had ever seen her. Eleanor looked up as footsteps approached, and relief washed over her face. "Anthony." The sheriff moved quickly to her side, kneeling down despite his uniform to check her wrists. "Mom, are you hurt?" "What happened?" "I'm okay," she said, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "It's just been unexpected." Anthony looked at the marks on her wrists, and his expression darkened. "Who put cuffs on you? Were they necessary? Were they too tight?" Eleanor put her hand on his arm. "One thing at a time, son." By now, a small crowd of officers had gathered at a distance, watching the scene unfold. Among them stood Officer Hayes, the realization of what he had done slowly dawning on his face. He had arrested the sheriff's mother, a woman who, according to the growing whispers around him, was one of the most respected people in the county. Anthony helped Eleanor to her feet, supporting her elbow. "Let's go to my office, Mom. We'll sort this out." As they walked past the gathered officers, silence followed them. Eleanor held her head high, but Anthony could feel a slight tremor in her arm. Officer Hayes stepped forward, paperwork in hand. "Sir, I need to—" Anthony fixed him with a stare that made him step back. "My office. 10 minutes." His tone left. No room for discussion. Inside the sheriff's office, Eleanor finally allowed herself to sink into a chair. Anthony closed the door and knelt in front of her again, this time taking her hands in his. "Tell me everything," he said gently. Eleanor recounted the stop, the accusation, the handcuffs that were too tight despite her complaints, and the search of her car. As she spoke, Anthony's expression grew increasingly troubled. They didn't even call to verify the description, Eleanor concluded. The desk sergeant mentioned it should have been a young woman, but Officer Hayes just continued with the arrest. Anthony stood and paced the small office. This should never have happened. The protocol is clear about verification before detention. He saw what he expected to see, Eleanor said quietly. An old black woman in a blue car became a shoplifter in his mind. Anthony stopped pacing and looked at his mother. Despite everything, she sat with dignity, analyzing the situation with the same clear-eyed wisdom that had guided his childhood. A knock at the door interrupted them. Anthony's assistant poked her head in. "Sir, Officer Hayes is waiting and the chief called. He's on his way in. Also, there's video of the arrest online already. Several neighbors filmed it." Anthony nodded grimly. "Thank you. Tell Hayes I'll be out shortly." After his assistant left, he turned back to his mother. "Mom, I need to handle this officially now." Eleanor stood up, smoothing her dress. "I understand. You have a job to do. I'll have someone drive you home first." Eleanor shook her head. "No, I want to be here. This isn't just about me anymore." Anthony looked at his mother with a mix of pride and concern. Even now, she was thinking about the bigger picture. He nodded slowly. "Okay, but first, let's get some ice for those wrists." As they stepped out of the office together, the station had become unusually busy for a weekday afternoon. Officers who normally wouldn't be on duty had appeared, drawn by text messages and calls about what had happened. The chief's car had just pulled into the parking lot, and at the front desk, Officer Hayes stood ramrod straight, his face pale as paper. The reckoning was about to begin. By nightfall, everyone in Pine Creek had heard about what happened to Eleanor Wilson. Cell phone videos of her arrest had spread across social media faster than wildfire. The most viewed clip showed the moment Officer Hayes had placed handcuffs on the elderly woman while she calmly explained that the cuffs were hurting her wrists. Another showed her being placed in the back of the police car while neighbors called out that there must be some mistake. The Pine Creek Police Department's phone lines lit up like Christmas trees. Calls poured in from concerned citizens, former students of Eleanor's, local business owners, and reporters from neighboring counties. The department's social media pages filled with demands for answers. Chief Rodriguez called an emergency meeting with the county's public relations team. "This is a disaster," he said, rubbing his temples. "Mrs. Wilson taught half the town. People are furious." In his office, Sheriff Anthony Wilson faced the most challenging situation of his career. As a law enforcement leader, he believed in the system and its processes. As a son who had seen his mother's bruised wrists and shaken confidence, he wanted immediate action. "You need to suspend Hayes immediately," the county attorney advised, looking through the preliminary report. "The evidence is damning. No verification of the suspect description. Excessive force with an elderly woman, ignoring health concerns about the handcuffs being too tight." Anthony nodded, his face a mask of professional control. "I want a full investigation. Every protocol he violated. Every decision point where he should have acted differently." "Sir," his deputy added cautiously, "the community is calling for his badge. They want him fired, not just suspended." Anthony stood and looked out his office window at the gathering crowd outside the station. Signs were already appearing. "Justice for Mrs. Wilson" and "Who teaches the police?" "We follow procedure," Anthony said firmly. "Hayes gets due process, just like anyone else. But the investigation will be thorough and swift." Across town, Officer Richard Hayes sat alone in his apartment, the blinds drawn against the world. His phone buzzed constantly with texts from colleagues and notifications from news sites using his name and face in their headlines. He had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation, his badge and gun surrendered to Internal Affairs just hours after the sheriff had discovered what happened. Hayes paced the small living room, alternating between defensive justifications and moments of sickening clarity. In his mind, he had been doing his job, following a lead on a reported crime. But deeper down, in places he didn't want to examine, uncomfortable questions formed. Would he have treated an elderly white woman the same way? Why had he been so quick to assume guilt? Why hadn't he loosened the handcuffs when Eleanor complained about pain? His police union representative had called, promising to defend him. It was an honest mistake, the rep had said. Anyone could have made it. But Hayes wasn't sure he believed that anymore. The look on the sheriff's face when he'd questioned Hayes kept replaying in his mind. "Walk me through your decision process," Sheriff Wilson had asked, his voice professionally detached. Despite the personal nature of the situation, Hayes had explained about the shoplifting report, the blue sedan description, and the reported suspect's age and appearance, the sheriff had asked. Hayes had hesitated. "The report said, a younger woman." "My mother is 68 years old, Officer Hayes." The simple statement had hung in the air between them, damning in its implications. Now, alone in his apartment, Hayes grabbed a beer from the refrigerator, then put it back untouched. He needed a clear head to figure out what to do next, how to salvage his career, if that was even possible. His phone rang again. This time it was his mother calling from 2 states away. "Richie, you're on the news here," she said, worry clear in her voice. Hayes closed his eyes. "It's bad, Mom." "What happened?" "They're saying you arrested an old woman for no reason." "It's complicated," he started, then stopped himself. "No, actually, it's not that complicated. I messed up. I really messed up." The silence on the line stretched between them until his mother spoke again. "Then you need to make it right however you can." At the Wilson household, Eleanor sat in her favorite armchair, a cup of chamomile tea growing cold on the side table. Anthony had insisted she stay with him for a few days, concerned about reporters who might show up at her door, or, worse, angry. Supporters who might target Officer Hayes and mistakenly go to her house instead. Eleanor's phone kept lighting up with messages from friends, former colleagues, and former students offering support. Her book club ladies had dropped off her car, retrieved from the police station along with a new Pi to replace the one that had been ruined during the search. "What are you thinking about, Mom?" Anthony asked, noticing her distant expression. Eleanor looked up at her son, who seemed both the powerful sheriff and the worried boy she had raised. "I'm thinking about that young officer, actually." Anthony's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Hayes? After what he put you through?" Eleanor nodded slowly. "He made a terrible mistake based on assumptions he probably doesn't even realize he carries. Now his life will never be the same." "Mom, he hurt you. He violated your rights." "Yes, he did," Eleanor agreed, "and there should be consequences. But destroying his life won't fix what's broken in the system." Anthony sat down across from his mother. "What would you have me do then?" Eleanor took a moment before answering. "Your job. Follow the process fairly. But maybe there's a way for some good to come from this." The next morning, the county commissioner called an emergency meeting about the incident. Community leaders packed the room, including Pastor Thompson from Eleanor's church, the president of the local NAACP chapter, and several business owners. The atmosphere was tense, with demands for immediate action competing with calls for systematic change. Anthony presented the preliminary findings of the investigation and announced Officer Hayes' suspension. "We're conducting a thorough review of all our procedures and training," he concluded. "This incident revealed failures that must be addressed." From the back of the room, a voice called out, "We want him fired, today." Others joined in agreement, until Pastor Thompson stood up. "Before we call for one man's career to end, we should ask what that accomplishes. Does firing one officer change the assumptions that led to Mrs. Wilson's arrest?" The room quieted as Eleanor herself stood up, surprising everyone, including her son. She hadn't told Anthony she planned to attend. "I was humiliated yesterday," Eleanor began, her voice steady. "I was treated as less than human because of assumptions made about me based on my skin color and the car I drive. That is unacceptable." The room remained silent, everyone listening intently. "But I've spent my life as an educator," she continued, "and when a student makes a mistake, even a serious one, my first question isn't how do I punish them, but rather, how do I ensure they learn from this?" Anthony watched his mother with a mixture of pride and amazement. Even now, after everything, she was finding a way forward that wasn't about revenge but about creating change. Outside the meeting room, local news crews set up cameras. This story was far from over. The internal affairs investigation moved with unusual speed. Within a week, a thick folder landed on Sheriff Anthony Wilson's desk, containing interviews, evidence, and conclusions. Anthony read through it carefully, taking notes and occasionally stopping to rub his tired eyes. He hadn't been sleeping well since his mother's arrest. The evidence was damning. Officer Hayes had violated 6 departmental policies during Eleanor's arrest. Body camera footage showed his unwarranted suspicion and quick escalation. Most troubling was what the investigation found in Hayes's personnel file from his previous department in Riverdale County, a file that had somehow been overlooked during the hiring process. 3 complaints about aggressive tactics with minority citizens in 2 years, Anthony muttered to himself, flipping through the paperwork. None had resulted in formal discipline, but together they painted a concerning pattern. Anthony closed the folder and looked at the photo on his desk, himself, and Eleanor at his sheriff swearing-in ceremony 3 years ago. She had been so proud that day, telling everyone that her son would bring fairness to law enforcement in their county. His intercom buzzed. "Sir, Officer Hayes and his union representative are here for the disciplinary hearing." Anthony straightened, his uniform. "Send them in." Officer Hayes entered looking like he had aged 5 years in the past week. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his normally crisp uniform hung slightly loose, suggesting he hadn't been eating much. Behind him walked Union Representative Bill Parker, carrying a briefcase and wearing a confident expression that contrasted sharply with Hayes's defeated demeanor. "Sheriff," Parker began after they were seated, "before we start, I want to emphasize that Officer Hayes has an otherwise exemplary record. This unfortunate incident, let's call it what it was," Anthony interrupted. "The unlawful detention of a citizen based on insufficient evidence and failure to follow verification protocols." Parker shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, well, these things happen in the line of duty. Split-second decisions—" "It wasn't split-second," Anthony said, opening the folder. "According to the timeline established by the dashboard camera, Officer Hayes followed my mother for 6 minutes before initiating the stop. That 6 minutes he could have used to radio in for a better description of the suspect." Hayes looked down at his hands. The union rep tried again. "Richard was following his training and instincts." "That's what concerns me most," Anthony said, looking directly at Hayes now. "What instincts led you to see a 68-year-old woman in a blue sedan and immediately connect her to a shoplifting report about someone 40 years younger?" For the first time, Hayes spoke up. "I was focused on the vehicle description, sir, and not on the person inside it." Hayes had no answer for that. The disciplinary hearing lasted 2 hours. Hayes attempted to defend his actions based on instinct and training, but when confronted with the evidence and pattern of behavior from his previous department, his excuses rang hollow even to his own ears. At the town hall meeting that evening, the community center buzzed with tension. Extra chairs had been brought in to accommodate the crowd. Local news cameras lined the back wall. Chief Rodriguez sat with Anthony and other department heads at a table facing the audience, all wearing carefully neutral expressions. Eleanor arrived, with her friend Gladys from the book club. Despite Anthony's concerns about her attending, Eleanor had insisted. "This is about more than me now," she had told him that morning. "I need to be there." When Eleanor entered, the room fell silent, then erupted in applause. Former students rushed to greet her. Neighbors offered hugs and words of support. By the time the meeting started, Eleanor had moved to the front row, directly in the line of sight of every officer on the panel. Chief Rodriguez opened with a statement about the investigation findings. "Based on clear evidence of policy violations, Officer Hayes has been suspended without pay for 30 days. Additionally, he will be required to complete extensive retraining in community policing, bias recognition, and proper detention procedures before returning to active duty." The announcement met with immediate disapproval from the crowd. A middle-aged man stood up. "That's it? A month's vacation and some classes? My son gets pulled over twice a month for driving a nice car while being black and nothing changes. Others joined in, sharing similar stories. The meeting threatened to spiral into chaos until Eleanor raised her hand. The room quieted immediately. "May I speak?" she asked. Chief Rodriguez nodded, relief evident on his face at the interruption. Eleanor stood and turned to face her neighbors and former students. Despite her ordeal, she carried herself with the same dignity she had shown as principal of Pine Creek High. "What happened to me wasn't just about one officer making a mistake," she began, her voice clear and steady. "It was about assumptions that run deep in our society. Assumptions that make some people seem suspicious just because of how they look." The room remained silent, everyone listening intently. "I don't want Officer Hayes's career destroyed," she continued, surprising many. "I want his thinking transformed, and not just his, all of ours." Eleanor looked directly at the panel of officers. "When I was principal, if a teacher consistently failed to reach certain students, I didn't just fire them. I helped them learn new approaches. But I also changed our systems to better serve those students." She turned back to the crowd. "We need both. Accountability for individuals and change in the system. Firing one officer won't fix what's broken, but neither will empty promises of reform." After Eleanor's speech, community leaders presented specific proposals: civilian oversight boards, revised hiring practices, mandatory body cameras with public access to footage, and community engagement requirements for all officers. Chief Rodriguez, seeing the way the wind was blowing, made an unexpected announcement. "In light of recent events, I'm establishing a community bridge task force to develop implementation plans for these proposals, co-chaired by Sheriff Wilson and Mrs. Eleanor Wilson, if she's willing." Surprised murmurs ran through the crowd. Anthony looked at his mother, who nodded her acceptance with a small smile. As the meeting continued, Officer Hayes slipped into the back of the room. He stood in the shadows, listening to story after story of community members' negative experiences with law enforcement. Each account hit him like a physical blow, challenging everything he had told himself about being one of the good ones. When the meeting ended, Hayes waited near the exit. As Eleanor passed, he stepped forward. "Mrs. Wilson," he said, his voice barely audible above the crowd's chatter. "I know it doesn't change anything, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. Truly sorry." Eleanor studied his face for a long moment. "You're right, Officer Hayes. It doesn't change what happened. But what will you do now? That's what matters." Hayes swallowed. Hard. "I don't know yet, but I'm listening now. Really listening." Eleanor nodded slightly. "That's a start." As Eleanor walked away to join her son, Hayes remained standing alone, the weight of his actions and their consequences settling fully on his shoulders. For the first time, he began to truly understand the depth of the damage that assumptions like his could cause, not just to his career, but to an entire community's sense of safety and trust. The reckoning had begun, not just for Hayes, but for the entire Pine Creek Police Department. 6 months passed like a slow turning page. The summer heat gave way to fall colors, and Pine Creek changed in ways both visible and invisible. The most obvious change stood at the corner of Main Street and Oak Avenue, a newly renovated building, with a fresh coat of blue paint and a sign that read, Eleanor Wilson Community Bridge Center. Inside, the center buzzed with activity. A group of teenagers worked on a mural depicting handshakes between people of different backgrounds. 2 police officers sat at a round table with several elderly residents, all laughing over coffee and donuts. In a side room, a workshop on understanding your rights during police interactions was just wrapping up. Eleanor moved through the space with quiet pride, stopping to chat with everyone. At 70, she had never expected to lead a community initiative like this, but life had a way of presenting unexpected paths. Mrs. Wilson called a young officer named Diane. "The chief approved our ride-along program with the high school. Students, we can start next month." Eleanor smiled. "Wonderful news. Let's make sure we have permission forms ready for the parents." Outside, Sheriff Anthony Wilson pulled into the parking lot in his county vehicle. He glanced at the clock. right on time for the center's 6-month anniversary celebration. Inside his glove compartment sat a small wrapped gift for his mother, a silver pin shaped like a bridge. It had taken some searching to find the perfect symbol for what she had accomplished. As Anthony locked his car, he spotted a familiar figure walking hesitantly toward the center entrance. Richard Hayes, no longer in uniform, wore civilian clothes, jeans and a button-down shirt. He carried a small potted plant. Anthony took a deep breath. Despite everything that had happened, seeing Hayes still stirred complicated feelings. The man had arrested Anthony's mother on flimsy evidence, but in the months since, Hayes had shown genuine effort to learn from his mistake. Still, Anthony kept a professional distance, letting his mother take the lead on how much Hayes should be involved in the bridge program. Hayes noticed the sheriff and nodded awkwardly. Sheriff Wilson. Hayes, Anthony acknowledged. Here for the celebration? If that's okay, Hayes replied, his voice uncertain. Your mother invited me. Anthony nodded, holding the door open. Then you should come in. The main room had been transformed for the celebration. Tables lined the walls with homemade food brought by community members. Photos documenting the center's first 6 months covered one wall. Workshops, community cleanup days, basketball games between officers and local teens. Eleanor spotted her son and walked over to give him a hug. Right on time, she said, then noticed Hayes standing awkwardly behind Anthony. Richard, I'm glad you came. Hayes shifted the plant in his hands. This is for the center. It's a peace lily. They're supposed to be easy to care for. Eleanor accepted the gift with a warm smile. Thank you, it will look perfect on the front desk. The room gradually filled with people from all parts of Pine Creek. Business owners, teachers, students, officers, and families. Chief Rodriguez arrived with the mayor. Local reporters set up cameras in the corner. What had begun as a small response to a single incident had grown into something the entire town took pride in. Anthony watched his mother move through the crowd, greeting everyone by name, making connections between people who might never have spoken otherwise. In 6 months, she had created a space where real conversations happened, where officers learned about the community's fears and residents learned about the challenges of policing. At the front of the room, Eleanor tapped a microphone. If I could, have everyone's attention, please. The crowd quieted immediately, a habit many had developed during their school years under Principal Wilson. 6 months ago, we gathered in a room much like this one, but the atmosphere was very different, Eleanor began. We were angry, hurt, and divided by an incident that could have torn our community apart. Heads nodded throughout the room. Everyone remembered the tension of those days. Instead, we chose a different path, Eleanor continued. We chose to build bridges rather than walls. We chose to listen to each other even when it was uncomfortable. She gestured to the photos on the wall. Look at what we've accomplished together. Crime reports are down 12%. Civilian complaints against officers have decreased by 30%. And most importantly, people are talking to each other again. Really talking. Anthony felt a swell of pride. His mother had turned her own painful experience into something that benefited everyone. Under her guidance, the department had implemented new training programs, civilian oversight, and community engagement requirements for all officers. Eleanor's voice grew softer, more personal. I want to share a story that few people know. 3 months ago, I was driving home from my book club and I got pulled over. A murmur ran through the crowd. Anthony straightened, brow furrowed. He hadn't heard about this. It was a routine traffic stop. My taillight was out, Eleanor continued. The young officer approached my car respectfully, explained why he'd stopped me, and asked for my license and registration. When he recognized my name, he didn't treat me differently. He did his job professionally, gave me a warning, and wished me a good evening. She smiled. It may seem like a small thing, but to me it represented real change. Not because I expect special treatment, but because I received the same respectful treatment every citizen deserves. From his position near the back of the room, Hayes listened intently. He had spent the past 6 months working through the bridge program, first as a participant, then as a volunteer after his suspension ended. He had chosen not to return to policing, instead applying to law school with plans to work in civil rights. The journey hadn't been easy. Some people in town still crossed the street when they saw him coming, Eleanor continued. True transformation isn't quick or easy. It happens one conversation, one policy change, one moment of understanding at a time. She raised her glass of punch. So today we celebrate 6 months of building bridges, and tomorrow we continue the work. As applause filled the room, Hayes found himself standing next to Anthony. For a moment, neither spoke. "Your mother is an extraordinary woman," Hayes finally said. Anthony nodded. "She taught me that justice isn't about punishment, it's about making things right." "I'm still learning that lesson," Hayes admitted. "We all are," Anthony replied. Across the room, a local reporter approached Eleanor for an interview. "Mrs. Wilson, how does it feel to see this center thriving after what happened to you?" Eleanor considered the question. "What happened 6 months ago was painful, but necessary. Sometimes it takes a shock to wake us up to problems we've been ignoring." "And Officer Hayes?" the reporter pressed. "How do you feel about his involvement here after he was the one who arrested you?" Eleanor glanced toward Hayes and her son, standing in awkward but civil conversation. "Richard made a terrible mistake based on assumptions he didn't even realize he carried. But he's done the hardest thing a person can do, faced those assumptions honestly, and worked to change them." As the celebration continued around them, Eleanor watched the diverse crowd with satisfaction. The Bridge Center wouldn't solve every problem or heal every divide, but it was a start. And as she had learned in 40 years of teaching, sometimes the most important lessons began with the most difficult mistakes.